Hello everyone, thank you for joining us on this edition of the news on Équinoxe Television. We are broadcasting from Cameroon's economic capital, Douala. I am Babla Jonathan. In our top stories in this edition of the news, after close to a month of house arrest, the leader of the Cameroon Renaissance Movement CRM political party, Professor Maurice Kamto, comes out of his residence questioning security and defense forces on why they are hindering persons, notably women of the women's wing of the party, from meeting him. Details in this edition of the news. And in the southwest region of the Republic of Cameroon, Victor Kelengo is ousted from the post of city mayor of Kumba. A rerun of the election left him on the failure side today. Thanks, dear viewers, for joining us on this edition of the news. We begin right away in the nation's political capital, Yaoundé, where the residence of the national president of the Cameroon Renaissance Movement CRM political party witnessed a reinforcement of security and defense forces deployed to his residence. He has been under house arrest for close to a month since the September 22nd anti-government protests orchestrated by the party and its allies in some major towns of the country, denouncing bad governance and the failure of the Yaoundé regime to solve the security and socio-political challenges affecting the country, notably the security crisis in the northwest and southwest regions of the Republic of Cameroon. The political leader has been under what some lawyers qualify as forceful detention for close to a month, and today security and defense forces were redeployed in their numbers to his residence ahead of the visit of members of the women's wing of the CRM political party who wanted to meet the national president. And he came out of his residence today for the first time since September 22nd, 2020 to meet the women, and also he went questioning the security and defense forces on why they are hindering people from visiting him, notably the women of the CRM political party. We'll be bringing to you updates on that in our subsequent news editions. Now to the southwest region of the Republic of Cameroon, Victor Kelengo has been ousted from the post of city mayor of Kumba in the Meme division. The former government delegate of the Kumba City Council, who won the election, has been ousted during a rerun of the election, and now there is a new city mayor in the town of Kumba. We have details with Simanjik and Gabriel.
There were many Kumba inhabitants who were present at the premises of the Kumba City Council located in the Commercial Avenue. They all came to witness the election of the new city mayor, whose stakes were high. In front of the eligible voters, Gregory Ntamayog Mewanu and outgoing city mayor Victor Kelengo were battling for the lone seat a second time this year. Before they could ever go to the elections proper, primaries took place, which saw Gregory Ntamayog Mewanu beating Victor Kelengo by 42 votes to 33. According to the electoral code, if someone had an absolute majority over another in the primaries, elections were not supposed to continue. Asked to have a consensus by the supervisor of the exercise, Minister Paul Tasson, both rejected. And in the course of the nomination exercise by councillors who were present, Gregory Ntamayok Mewanu was nominated by councillors, while Victor Kelengo nominated himself. In the election that followed, Gregory Ntamayok Mewanu had 64 votes, while Victor Nkelengo had just 11 votes. One ballot was empty. 75 councillors in total were present for the vote. Gregory Ntamayok Mewanu is thus the pioneer city mayor of Kumba City Council. He will be assisted by Madame Ebanja Victorine as first deputy and Sako Maximilian as second deputy city mayor.
Greg Mewanu is now the city mayor of Kumba, Meme Division, Southwest region of the Republic of Cameroon. Now we are taking you to the west region of the country, and drivers plying the road in the Bati under the Kalim subdivision in the west region of Kauz are calling on government to rescue them from the extremely bad state of the road and its consequences on the vehicles and activities. It is in this report compiled by Smanjik and Gabriel.
Drivers plying the Bati Road in Galim subdivision of the West region, opening the road for their cars to pass freely. The road that has been abandoned has now become a veritable nightmare. Bati, blessed with good soil, is cursed because the road is unaccessible.
I'm a full driver with my license. I have my license. Look at me. See how we're doing. I don't like trouble. This one Namawo. For what good Namawo? But see how we're doing. But for root money. For root so money. See, a full driver.
Their harvests at the end of the day are abandoned in the farm because it is difficult for them to transport the produce to town. For that reason, thieves make away with their produce. They are now begging.
We are pleading so the government can hear us and answer us so that we have enough road, a good road, so that we remove our foodstuff and sell to the people, because there are many people who is coming here to fool us, taking our foodstuff. We need some road. We don't have road. We don't have anything, and we have more foodstuff to remove on this road. The road is not enough for us to use it. We need a good road for us so that we can remove our foodstuff in this village.
The road that is heading to Bati is also an access way to several towns in the southwest and littoral regions respectively. They are now urging the government to come to their rescue.
Okay.
At least 626 kilograms of elephant tusk seized from illegal businessmen in the south region of the Republic of Cameroon, notably in Ambam in the Ntem Valley Division, southwest region of the south region of the Republic of Cameroon, and that quantity of elephant tusk is equal to 59 elephants killed, and the traffickers are said to have entered the country from neighboring Gabon by road, and the traffickers were intercepted by officers of the customs department and handed over to elements of the Ambam Gendarmerie Command, and they are going to face the heavy arm of the law for their involvement in that illegal business. Onto something else now. We are taking you to another part of the country to talk about the situation there, and of course we're talking about Gregoire Ntamayok Mewanu, who has been elected as the pioneer city mayor of Kumba. No, not that. We are talking about something else. We already talked about the mayor of Kumba, who is now Greg Mewanu, the new city mayor of Kumba. Coming up next, we take you to neighboring Nigeria, where we are going to talk about the situation there with the increasing violence in that country, the anti-SARS protests going on in neighboring Nigeria, and latest information streaming into our studios indicates that armed men have attacked a media house in the Republic of Nigeria's biggest city, Lagos, as the anti-police brutality protest continues for the second week. And the nation's newspaper editor Adiniyi Adesina says that the men bought petrol on the gates of the premises and set it ablaze. And these are some of the damages that have been recorded within the context of the anti-SARS protests in neighboring Nigeria. And the country's vice president has promised justice for victims shot during protests against police brutality. Amnesty International said that the security forces killed at least 12 people in the main city, Lagos, Tuesday. Gunshots continued to be heard in an area of Lagos today following yesterday's protest move in that part of the country, and buildings were attacked and looted, and police shooting into the air to enforce a curfew. The state government imposed an indefinite round-the-clock curfew in Lagos in a bid to bring down the tensions in neighboring Nigeria. And the protesters have been on the streets for over 2 weeks now, demanding that the government puts an end to police brutality, and the SARS, or the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, had been disbanded and the SWAT created. But the protesters are saying that nothing has changed. In their opinion, the police brutality that was experienced in the country, or that is being experienced with the SARS officers, will continue. Earlier, the Nigerian government had announced that the SARS officers will be put through a psychological training before being redeployed for service in the police corps in Nigeria. But the protesters are saying that this is not enough. Police brutality must end, and government has to take tougher actions to put an end to the violation of their rights and abuse of power by police officers in neighboring Nigeria. Now, Talking Point is coming up next.
Of Ngaoundéré, newly admitted students are already aware of what exactly awaits them. The increased rate of juvenile delinquency in Cameroon, increased rape, domestic violence, and increased rates of crimes of passion across the country has motivated most of the students, like Minsiwa Mire said, to go in for psychology.
Je me disais que prendre la psychologie, je pourrais les...
The first-year psychology student says she hopes to impact positive change within the Cameroonian society by building sound minds and help people in difficulties.
Vu que mon petit frère a un retard dans son comportement,
she says her junior brother, who suffers a defect in reasoning, is among the Cameroonians she hopes to help. She desires to become a guidance counselor.
J'aimerais être conseiller.
They are in 100 who have chosen psychology at the University of Ngaoundéré. The teaching and learning process in amphitheaters of the university has changed to fit into the anti-COVID-19 orientation.
Alors pour l'année académique 2020-2021,
according to Professor Menye Ngajemen, Dean of the Faculty of Education, e-learning has been incorporated for minor courses and practical sessions with students.
Travaux dirigés et certaines explications alternatives seront faites sur la plateforme e-learning.
The wearing of face masks, proper hand washing, use of hand sanitizers, and routine control of temperature has become a major characteristic of the new academic year in the University of Ngaoundéré.
For me, I'm Strong Sander reporting there on the University of Ngaoundere and the 2020-2021 academic year. Talking Point comes up next. In Talking Point today, we are going to be discussing the work of human rights defenders, the protection and safety of human rights defenders. Our guest is a human rights officer. He is the human rights officer at the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa. He is also the humanitarian coordinator of that organization, joining us today. Thank you for joining us in this edition of Talking Point. Tonga Benjamin.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. First of all, who is a human rights defender?
Yeah, so a human rights defender is basically anyone who works and who is engaged in the promotion and protection of fundamental human rights. So it doesn't require any specific qualification to become a human rights defender. So you find that journalists in their rights are also human rights defenders, teachers, lawyers, it can be trade unionists, it can be environmentalists, everybody who works, within the confines and within the paradigms of the protection and promotion of fundamental human rights. It might be individually, it might be collective in an organization, and anybody who is engaged in such a venture is classified to be a human rights defender.
All right, Barrister Abobala, who is your boss, the president and founder of Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa, a renowned human rights defender, during a workshop today organized by Friedrich Ebert Foundation and the Center for Human Rights and Democracy online by video conference, said that human right defending human right or being a human right defender is a vocation. How is it a vocation?
Yeah, it's a vocation, and it's a conviction, and it's a calling. Why? Because it is not a lofty profession where you expect to make all the money. It must be something that you would go out and above of your way, out and above of your comfort zone, to protect the rights, of individuals or people who have been violated. Because if there is gross and systematic human rights in a society, there must be people who must speak out for it. There must be the human rights defenders act as the voice to the voiceless. So it's not something, nobody is being paid to become a human rights defender. So it comes out of your own volition. It comes out of a personal conviction, because certainly there are people who cannot stay the sight of injustice in a society, right? So in the face of these, there are human rights defenders who put their lives on the limelight, at the cost of almost nothing, trying to defend, trying to be the voice of the voiceless, and to make sure that there is some remedial measures that are put in place where, these sacrosanct rights are being violated.
Is the conviction, the urge, and the determination to fight for the rights of people or to fight against human rights violations, are these elements enough for someone to be a human rights defender?
Yeah, it might not necessarily be enough, but these are some of the characteristics that you need, to become a human rights defender. You must be selfless. Therefore means that you must not think about your personal interests. You must be there to advocate for the rights of those who are violated, to make sure that you can bring perpetrators to book, to make sure that you can question and ask for reforms of laws, to make sure that you can advocate for better local content laws and policies, so that you can be a society that is moving towards the right direction through the respect of fundamental human rights.
What about training? It is generally agreed that for anybody to be efficient, to be effective in doing whatsoever, there is need for formal or informal training, need for that person to be well equipped in order to succeed in this case, to fight for the rights of people, to fight against human rights violations.
Most definitely, Babila. The training to equip human rights defenders is not something which you can sweep under the carpet. Even though you constitute yourself as an individual human rights defender, it's also important to find yourself within the block of human rights defenders. That way you can have several trainings, to give you the necessary skills that you need to protect the rights of others. Because for you to be able to protect the rights of others, you must be conversant, about the laws that are applicable, the human rights laws that are applicable, for you to be able to to protect the rights of others. And in a typical style, as a center, as a human rights organization, we've been organizing several conferences on monitoring and documenting human rights on the basis, on the backdrop of the Anglophone crisis that we are facing, where there is gross and systematic human rights violations. We have been organizing trainings, to equip human rights defenders with the necessary skills to monitor, to document, and to report some of these cases. We did another training today, which is organized by the Ferish Herbert Foundation alongside the Center for Human Rights. This has been a training that has to go along all the 10 regions of Cameroon. We've done Southwest, we did Northwest, we did the Center region. We are doing Littoral now. We are still going to go to other regions, to talk, to discuss with human rights defenders in these regions, to talk about the things that they are doing, the challenges that they face on the field. In such typical style training, we also build capacity and pass on the necessary skills that are needed to become a human rights defender.
What's the necessity of networking? Why is it important for human rights defenders to network, to work with others? Because there is often a tendency of individualism. This is my file, I am the one handling it, and I will handle it right to the end, and sometimes the end is not always the result expected. So how important is it to network?
I think it's a great remiss for any human rights organization or individual to try to work in isolation. You must always come into synergy. So if 30 civil society organizations or human rights organizations in Cameroon come up to sign a memo, it produces a far more reaching effect than if one individual has to sign a memo. I think that we must devolve from this PhD mentality of pulling him or her down. And if you are a real human rights defender, the most important thing is not about you being the one to make mention about the violations. The most important thing is to ensure that the violations, are mentioned and a remedy is being put at the forefront, irrespective of the organization or the individual who brings the news to the limelight. I think that we must pass this level where everybody wants to be seen to be doing everything. You must have that conviction as a human rights defender. Try to work within the network, because the network, can protect you as a human rights defender as well when the things do not go right for you. So I think that the need for a synergy for human rights defenders in Cameroon cannot be overemphasized.
All right, one of your colleagues was here some weeks back, and he said that human rights defenders are not newsbreakers.
Definitely, they are not newsbreakers. We verify, we authenticate information before we let it out. So we are not typical styled bloggers who would give out information without verification. So even before we do a report on violations that are occurring, this report is backed by numerous calls and investigations that have been done on the field. When we are not sure, we say that a violation has occurred, and it is alleged that it is this party or this party who has committed this set violation. But when we are sure, after investigations, after reports that we have received, we can now name this particular person as a violator. So it's not just about breaking out the news. We don't break out the news. Anytime that we make a statement, we do it on the basis of fact finding. We do it on the basis of investigations that have been done on the field. Because I tell you, Babila, if at the end of the day you release an information about human rights violation, which is not correct, it tarnishes the reputation of the organization. It tarnishes the reputation of the human rights defenders. So at every point in time, human rights defenders must always make sure that the information that they send out to the public, is verifiable, because the right to accurate information is also a fundamental human right. And human rights organization cannot be seen to be disseminating information which is not accurate. So I think it is very, very important.
All right, professional bloggers and journalists equally do verify, they cross-check, they investigate, because these are core principles, these are core elements of the practice of journalism. But what's the difference with what the human rights defenders are doing? Is it that they're taking more time before coming out to publish?
Yes, most definitely. They take more time. You can see, I give you a classical example, the Gabo massacre. It happened, and then several days after and weeks after, that is when human rights organization, or specifically so speaking, the Center for Human Rights, which was the organization that made the first public statement, I think, about the Gabo massacre. It was backed by several, investigations, several reports that have been done. We made several calls to people who were on ground before we released the report. So we will not necessarily break out the news just at the spur of the moment. The breaking of the news or the dissemination of the reports and the information is always backed by numerous reports and investigations and documentation. And then when we are sure that this is what this particular actor is the one who committed this human rights violation, we name and we shame and we call for measures to be taken about it. But when we are not sure again, we still disseminate the information, but we put it at the end of the day that it is alleged that it was committed by these particular sets of people, because we are not sure about who did it. So we just give the information to the public.
Okay, let's talk about the challenges that human rights defenders face in their daily activities. This is a very delicate activity that often has to do with, going against some authorities, some people in society who are doing one wrong thing or the other, and going against somebody, it's often not an easy task. What are the challenges that human rights defenders face within the context of Cameroon?
Thank you very much for that question. I think that human rights defenders in Cameroon face enormous challenges. The challenges are as much as those who are willing to mention them. And human rights defenders, they strive within a political scenario in Cameroon which is not fair and which is typically disadvantageous for them. Human rights defenders strive in a society where, in Cameroon, where there is the element of the political deficit. We talk about weak institutions. We talk about the indispensable third-term syndrome. We talk about confiscation and non-contentious electoral laws. We talk about, this socio-political crisis in Anglophone Cameroon, or in English regions of Cameroon. We talk about the shrinking of the civic space, where human rights organizations or human rights individuals cannot exercise certain fundamental rights. You look at Article 2 of this December 2014 law, which talks about any form of demonstration which can be classified to be a form of terrorism. This is a shrinking of the civic space, and it hampers the work that human rights organizations are doing. And this goes against the spirit of the Constitution. It goes against international treaties which are duly signed and ratified, like the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The issues of terrorism as well in the Boko Haram, with the Boko Haram in the far north, it hampers the work of human rights organizations, as the case may be. I think of Cameroon as being a country that has a compendium of all human rights violations. You want to think about it. There is racial discrimination, with many people not willing to take back an albino as a potential wife. Say the Bakore woman is a lazy person. The Bakosi woman practices witchcraft, and nobody wants to get married to that particular. That's ethnic negative ethnicity and tribalism. We brandish at the political level, we brandish it as being so nice, but certain positions are still left for particular classes of people. We think about all of this has a great impact on the work of human rights defenders, because they cannot strive in an area where there is a shrinking of the civic space. They cannot strive in an area where there is weak institutions that cannot even facilitate in the promotion and protection of fundamental human rights. When there is an indispensable syndrome, third-term syndrome, where people do not want to leave power, it becomes a big problem for human rights defenders to strive. Where there is a crisis, protracted armed violence, human rights defenders cannot carry out their activities. We think about the recent pandemic, COVID-19. It also hampers the work of human rights defenders, because they cannot go into certain places due to lockdown measures, to protect the rights of certain people.
These challenges go a long way to hamper their activities, to render the activities of human rights defenders much more difficult and complicated. What about their security and safety? Their security and safety in this difficult atmosphere which you've just painted?
Yeah, you know that the primary responsibility to protect human rights defenders rests with the state. So the state is the one that has the primary responsibility to protect human rights defenders, and this is founded on the basis of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. But the reality is that the state might be unwilling or unable, or the state itself is a perpetrator for human rights violations against, human rights defenders. So I think that human rights defenders must take the initiative individually or collectively as an organization to safeguard themselves. It is very, very justifiable to safeguard and protect human rights defenders, because these are like the watchmen over the city. When everybody else is asleep, human rights defenders are awake, trying to see that rights and obligations are met within the society. So they face these numerous challenges, and it's very, very important. We think about safe spaces for human rights defenders. We do not have that in Cameroon. When the life of a human rights defender is threatened, we think about safe spaces. We do not have that in Cameroon. So those are the justifications. And human rights defenders in their work, because you can only be a human rights defender when you are alive. So when you are dead, you cannot be a human rights defender. It doesn't help the human rights cause. So in as much as we are committed to protecting fundamental human rights, we must also.
I was going to ask you.
Yeah,
That's about the state.
Yes.
Now about the individuals. What are they expected to do? What are some of the precautions that they are expected to take while going on with the fight for the rights of people?
I think that you, as a human rights defender, you must take initiatives for your own personal security. You must take initiative, and some of those personal security measures are something that perhaps I would not like to say here on air as a human rights defender, because it remains something which is like a secret for human rights defenders on how to meander their way through, amidst some of the things that they do. But I think that human rights defenders have that responsibility, to take protection measures against themselves. It might not just be individually. Organizations also have the responsibility to protect their members who are human rights defenders in the line of the work that they do. These measures that can be put in place can be security-wise, can be creating safe spaces for human rights defenders, where they can go and have a cool, where there is so much tension and there is threat of life against human rights defenders. Those are just some of the safety measures and tips that human rights defenders can employ, to safeguard in the line of their duty.
And within the context of tips that human rights defenders are expected to adopt in their duties in order to, first of all, protect themselves before expecting protection from the state. One of the speakers in today's session of the 3-day webinar organized by Friedrich Ebert and the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa, Norman Taku, said that it is good for human rights defenders to have cordial relationships with the authorities, the police or the security and defense forces, and the administrative authorities. Why? What's the reason for that?
It's very, very important, because the tendency is that human rights defenders are being viewed to be inimical to the state, but that is not the case. If you look at the definition of civil society organizations or NGOs, they are being defined as soft governing. It means that they are also a prototype of the government. They are also a prototype of governing. It therefore means that we are not inimical to the police officers, or you must create that necessary relationship with the local authorities, with the security forces who are in place, because when we think about human rights violations, it is not only the security forces or who commit human rights violations. Other people commit human rights violations, and the security forces are not inimical to human rights violations, to human rights organizations, or to human rights defenders as itself. We all work to strive to see how we can have a better democracy, a better society for ourselves. So I don't think that there is any feud between these local authorities, police officers, and civil society organizations. We must all work in synergy if we want a better country.
What about the risk of influence peddling, being corrupted by some of those officials?
I didn't get the question.
What about the risk of influence peddling or being corrupted, for example, by some of those officials? If a human rights officer, for example, goes too close to the administrative authorities, the risk of being influenced by those administrative authorities, how does he manage that?
Yeah, I think that one of the guiding principles that works in line with defending human rights is the principle of neutrality. So the principle of neutrality simply means that you must keep, any affiliation, political affiliation, or any affiliation that you have with any authority. So I think that human rights defenders must carve this niche for themselves, this mandate of being neutral at every point in time, to not, bypass. The main goal is to protect and defend the rights of vulnerable people, of people whose rights have been violated, to ensure that perhaps they can effectively ventilate their rights through the legal window. It is not to coerce with public officials, is not to enter into relations with public officials or multinational companies, as the case may be. The intention is to protect the fundamental human rights, and that is the mandate. You know, it is not about creating this relationship. So I think that human rights defenders must always uphold this principle of neutrality in the line of work that they do. It's very, very important. Partisan, you know, don't have any affiliation with anybody. Be committed to doing the work that you're doing, you know, for posterity's sake.
Some of you human rights defenders are accused of inflating figures, aggravating situations in your reports for some personal gains and things like that. And the government officials who say this think that human rights defenders, human rights organizations live on that. If there are no crises, they will not exist. Somebody like Colonel Atonfa Cyril of the Ministry of Defense will tell you that human rights defenders, human rights organizations cannot live without crisis, cannot live without bloodshed, destruction going on here and there. And so they will do everything possible to make sure that these things continue happening so that they can continue existing. What do you have to say about this?
Okay, I would answer the first question. You talked about the element of human rights organizations or civil society organizations, you know, scaling through with the numbers as to violations, as the case may be. In every profession there are miscreants, Mabila. In a typical academic milieu, there will be teachers who will give questions to students before time. They talk about the abolition of abortion, but there will be doctors who will still commit abortion. So it's the same in civil society organizations. There will still be civil society organizations who will do these things, you know, to be able to make ends meet for themselves. But I think that it is a responsibility, and it goes again a long way to touch on the credibility of the civil society organization. That's why we have civil society organizations which are more credible than others. If we, as an organization, for instance, publish a report, you know, it is being used by international organizations and sometimes even by the government, you know, because I think that we have reached a certain level in terms of the credibility, because irrespective of whose ass we go, you know, irrespective of who we are going against, sometimes we publish reports against the military, and in the next week we are good in the eyes of the separatist fighters, we are bad in the eyes of the military. The next week we are publishing a report against the military, against the separatist fighters, we are good in the eyes of. So we uphold this principle of neutrality, irrespective. We are only there to, you know, to name and shame these violations, irrespective of who commits these violations, irrespective of that. And you talked about the second element of civil society organizations scaling through with numbers, increasing numbers, and not being partisan. That is,
and living on crisis.
Yes, and living on crisis. The truth of the issue is that for conflict analysts, they will tell you that conflict is inevitable. They will tell you that there can be no society without conflict, right? And there can be no society without human rights violations. There will always be these violations. Take you in your typical family setting. There will always be a family feud between a brother and a sister. Human rights defenders are always there to make sure that when these violations eventually occur, there be some element of remedial causes, some compensation which is being done to restore injured parties back to the original positions that they were before, you know, the injury committed or occurred, or before the human rights occurred. So there will always be a conflict. They will always try to limit the adverse effect of this conflict. There will always be violations, but we'll try to educate people, to sensitize people, and the intention is to bring these violations to the minimal level. Even in highly classified societies, they see the presence of human rights violations. That's to tell us that these are violations that are well and alive, and they are living amongst us as human beings. So,
okay,
yeah.
Last thing before we go in some few seconds, human rights defenders, human rights organizations, where do they get money to carry on with all those activities, fighting for human rights and so on, sensitizing people, educating people? How do they get money to do all these things? Because this is where sometimes government authorities say you are being financed from people from outside the country who have their own objectives.
Today we organized a training on human rights defenders in Douala, and we did it via Zoom. There was little or no money involved. Almost little or no money. We did it for free. Sometimes we organized trainings in Boya, in our office space, where we have a small hall where we invite 50 people. They come there. We don't give them food. We don't give them participation fee. We don't give them anything. It's done almost for free. But just to answer your question, civil society organizations, there are lots of funding for civil society organizations working within the light of peace, conflict, human rights violations, as the case may be. Even the United Nations gets funding. So if you want to question civil society organizations, then you must question international organizations. Even the state has funding. So just like civil society organizations are also prototype government, they also engage in soft governing. They also need their own small finances to run their daily activities, and most of these finances come through funding from international organizations or from bodies, or the funding also come from states. States also fund other civil society organizations to carry out activities. So I think that is something, just like every other person has a funder, the same as civil society organizations have funding. But we are not so much of a rich people. Human rights defenders are not rich people. The training that we carried out today is on Zoom. Nobody got paid. You participated. I don't think you got paid for participating in the training. So it's not like we did something big. We always try to use the minimal resources that we have to reach out to a greater extent of the population.
Tonga Benjamin, Human Rights Officer and Humanitarian Coordinator at the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. That's it for today.
Équinoxe Télévision, au-delà de l'image, nous rendons compte. De lundi à vendredi.